Akuzamata as well.
Pardon me?
Maybe we can get a few Akuzmata as well as Mathemata.
Oh,
They tend to happen automatically anyway.
exactly.
Catchphrases.
Little, yeah, exactly. Little catchphrases. Okay, so Bo, do I have screen sharing
Yes. Yes. Screen sharing is on for you.
capacity? Okay, awesome. Thanks. All right.
Yeah, the recordings are good. I missed last session, and so I made it up by listening to the recording, and I found it helpful.
Okay, well, that's nice
Very
of you,
good.
Charlie. I
So-
appreciate that.
Yeah, so I'm glad that you are doing the recordings.
Oh, good. Well, that's great. All right. All right, it's 5 after. I might as well launch it. And like I said, since we're recording now, anybody who misses something at the beginning that they are interested in, they can refer back to the recording. So, whoops, host disable participant screen sharing.
Okay. I just turned screen sharing on. Finally got it done.
Oh, sorry.
Multiple participants. Okay. It's good.
All right. Sorry. These things are so small. Is this it? Oh, yeah. Okay. Okay. So, in the spirit of saying something hopefully fairly comprehensible, let me see. So everybody can see the screen? Sorry.
Mm-hmm.
For some reason, I can't see any of you anymore. Okay, I got you. I got you on the side there. Thanks. Oh, wait, that's not the one I wanted to share. That's one of my polemical ones for later. Okay. So what is everybody, sorry, I'm pretty bad at this. What's everybody seeing?
It's very large. Can you click the center icon to the left of the X so you're not sharing your whole? Someone knows Windows, help them out here. It's looking good, but humans become musical.
Right, okay, shit, I can't see the stupid thing.
If you hover over it with your mouse, you might be able to move from one picture to another. If you hover to the left or the right-hand side, it should show you a little arrow that you can use to navigate through the pictures.
Okay, sorry. So everybody sees this, human becomes musical, right?
Right.
Okay, I can't, let me see. All right, I think I got this now. Wait. Participants. I just made all the participants go away. I want that over there. All right. All right. Okay, now I got screen faces. I got the participants list in case somebody raises their hand, and I've got the particular screen that I wanted. So okay, I'm gonna launch in here. So I'm going over this stuff because I really want us to dwell a little bit in Aristotle's method and how he arrives at what he calls principles, so that we can start to think a little bit more about what these principles are, and how Aristotle arrives at them, and really what these principles are principles of, and with what right does he say that they're principles, for instance, of becoming. I want to kind of dive into these waters a little bit because they're central to not only his philosophy but any philosophy. And Aristotle in particular, you know, has the bad rap, at least, of somehow having been overcome in the 16th and 17th century. And because of that overcoming, we think of things somewhat differently. And so it's very, very important to recapture exactly what it is he's doing and why he's making that the assertions that he makes and what the reasons are for those assertions, so that we can, you know, kind of get at better at what is Aristotle grasping or seeing here that that is somehow, you know, either not part of our regular way of thinking of things, or we assume has been overcome, or what. Anyway, all right, so all that is background. So he starts off by saying he's going to investigate all cases of becoming. And when we hear that, we're like, oh, he's going to run around the entirety of the world and go all the way back into the past and all the way into the future and find every little event, every leaf falling, every volcano blasting, every plant growing, right? And he's going to do some kind of inductive thing. That's our modern way of understanding how one arrives at a statement about all things. All right, that and I think that it's clear in the contemporary discussion for the last 200 years since Hume, right, that there is no way to say anything about all things if you use that, if you go by way of induction. So our way of thinking about how to go about saying something about all things is doomed from the start. And yet it's the only, it seems like it's the only option. We don't really, at least in everyday life, outside of philosophy seminars, we really don't think that there's any other possible way. Well, Aristotle just goes and shows us another possible way. And by anything that we would attribute becoming to, we will attribute it in the sentence, X becomes. And so in looking at the sentence, X becomes, right, we are looking at all cases of becoming. At least that's the first, that's the first assumption. And Aristotle gives us some sentences. And the reason why he breaks this down into simple becoming and compound or composite becoming is because ultimately he's going to want to say something like this. If you think of becoming along the lines that are designated here as simple, you're going to end up with a Parmenidean theory of becoming, which concludes that there is no becoming, right? That change is illusory. And Aristotle's making the point that the only way we can understand how becoming is possible, and that becoming really is, that becoming is not an illusion, but that it really is if we look at compound or composite sentences, like the unmusical human becomes the musical human. All right. So we have these sentences: human becomes musical, the unmusical becomes musical, right? These are perfectly acceptable locutions, and in each one of these things, he gives them as simple, right, simple kinds of becoming, or simple forms of becoming, yeah. And then he gives us one example of the compound. So the only point of making this distinction is to begin to refute the Parmenidean argument that change is impossible. All right. So if we look at these, sentences, I mean, this is not something that Aristotle brings up, but I just wanted to point it out. In the simple sentences, the terms are not predications, and we saw at the very beginning in the categories that at the very beginning of the categories that there is no such thing as gaining knowledge, and therefore there's no such thing as saying something true or false about anything, unless we join a subject and a predicate, and we judge. Only in judging can we attain knowledge. So just interestingly enough, that early theory that we saw in the categories is here partially confirmed insofar as we can only get at the nature of becoming when we use predicate, little mini judgments like the unmusical human, or the human that is unmusical and the human that is musical. but that's just to the side as a way for me to constantly point out how important this subject predicate form is for Aristotle to make sense of anything as ontology, to make sense of anything in metaphysics or ethics or cosmology, right? You have to start from this basic predicative form, and whatever follows from that will follow from everything. And if we violate that, we will no longer be saying anything that can be true or false, and therefore we will not be talking about anything whatsoever. So one simple way to put this is, if you want to refer, you're going to need a subject and a predicate. Subjects alone don't do it. Predicates alone don't do it. No other part of a language alone does it. All right. So to see why, or see how Aristotle goes about analyzing language, right below, I've got substance becomes quality, quality becomes opposite quality, and both of these as unconditional forms of becoming. Right, so these map onto those first three sentences. So human becomes musical. If we're going to analyze it according to Aristotle's categories, we're going to have a substance becomes a quality. Now, there's one radically distinct kind of thing becomes a completely different kind of thing. Right? Again, quality becomes opposite quality. Something becomes its opposite, and thus completely other than itself. These are both forms of unconditional becoming. At least they're sentence forms that imply that becoming can be unconditional the way Parmenides thought it. Okay, so I have this little remark here. Parmenidean refutation of change and becoming originates in thinking change as simple or unconditional change. We have talked about this in the past as things popping into existence and popping out of existence, right? But from one state of a thing to the next state of a thing, there is nothing that remains constant through it popping in and popping out. And so this whole idea of unconditional change amounts to things popping into existence and then things popping out of existence, and then other things popping into existence, and then other things popping out. Right? Now, if we just follow that thought for a second, we can see how Parmenides would say, things either are or they are not. They've popped into existence or they popped out of existence. And since it makes no sense to say that things pop into existence from nothing, Parmenides will conclude that things don't pop into existence from nothing, but in fact, the appearance of change itself is merely illusory. It's just being itself. Oops. Sorry, my screen just blanked out. I'm not sure what just happened. Can people still hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
We still hear you and we still see your screen.
All right. Well, for some reason, mine just blacked out. Hold on.
Oh, that's much better, by the way. We see your screen better.
Oh, much better. Yep.
Okay. I don't know what I've done.
Can I ask a quick question?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Hey, do you think this Aristotelian answer to Parmenides is generally accepted by all philosophers or not? Or because I think I've rarely encountered a philosopher who says that change is illusory or that things pop into or out of existence. But at the same time, I feel like many of the people I encounter also are not particularly familiar with Aristotle.
Right. So that's an interesting question. And I would say that I don't know how to answer that, to be honest. The thing is one of the things I wanted to bring out today, what Aristotle is helping to bring out is that his conception of becoming is the necessary one to avoid the alternative of denying the reality of change. So in other words, if your theory, however you conceptualize change and becoming, if you spell that out, what is it that changes? What is it that comes to be? If you spell that out in such a way that you either have things coming to be from nothing, or you have things popping into existence and popping out of existence, you are in a Parmenidean, you have argued your way into a Parmenidean predicament. And you will be faced with the problem that your theory of change denies the reality of change. You are in a contradiction. So to the extent to which we make an account of change that is not contradictory, I mean, we'd have to look at historical examples, but I'm assuming that they would all be more or less in line with the Aristotelian, this very basic framework. Hey, you guys, my screen is completely blanked out. I have no idea why that is, but I'm going to shut down my computer here for a second and start it up again in the hopes that this comes back to normal. And so I will be right back. Pardon me?
Maybe Michael has turned on screensaver. Does anyone who's familiar?
Wait, Bo, you still talking? I can't even hear you. What the fuck?
Yes, I think you may have turned on your screen. Is your screen black? Is your screen black?
Sorry. Let me see. Sorry, this is so tedious for you. I still apologize. Just like, I'm just gonna, I can't figure out what it could be. This has never happened before, but of course
You're gonna have to pop out of existence for a little bit of time.
Yeah, man, pop right out of existence. I'll be right back.
Maybe he turned his monitor off.
Brings up an interesting, oh yeah, okay, awesome. Garth's question brings up a very, very interesting point, and that is this. Aristotle's account of becoming is not the be-all and end-all, the completely self-sufficient and total account of becoming. It is rather the minimum account that is required for us to think change or becoming as change or becoming, not along Parmenidean lines as what doesn't change, or as changelessness, or as what doesn't become, and thereby condemning change to be mere illusion. So what Aristotle says is not, hey, Parmenides, you dumbass, open your eyes, check it out. Things are moving all over the place, duh, right? He takes the argument seriously, right? He said, and he thinks, okay, so Parmenides is proving with an argument that change seems to be, and therefore our perceptions seem to be of change. But in reality, being cannot change, because change always includes some non-being, some nothing, because every change is a change from something that a thing is not yet to what it is. And so all change will require us to say of being that there is also non-being that is. And Parmenides says that cannot be. If change requires non-being, and it requires non-being in two separate ways, both in terms of what a thing becomes, it is not yet, and what it came from, it is no more. So there are two, let's call them aspects of non-being, built into the concept of change. But that, and Parmenides says, but that implies that we must think that non-being is brutal contradiction, an absolute impossibility. Hence, change cannot be real. It can only be seem to be real. Okay? So if any theory of change implies that non-being is and that being is not, same time and same respect, it is a contradictory and impossible theory, and we must deny the reality of change unless we can think about how, and now we can get at kind of what Aristotle's goal is. How can we think being and non-being together without falling into the contradiction that Parmenides says we can only sidestep if we deny the reality of change? So Parmenides would certainly acknowledge with any empiricist, yeah, it seems like things change, right? But you can't see something remaining itself through change. That's something that you have to grasp. You can't see it. And so whether the thing that is large is the same thing that is now small, like the melting snowball, whether this is one thing undergoing change or two completely and utterly different things, our perceptions give us no handhold on that. So we must, as the Platonic Socrates says, we must turn to the logos, we must turn to the argument to find out what we are logically compelled to think about change. Is change impossible and therefore illusory? Or is there a way to think about the non-being that change implies in such a way that we don't end up in that contradiction? So that was a long kind of detour in answer to Garth's question. So the Aristotelian, so-called Aristotelian definition, we haven't even reached his definition yet. We've just got at some of the principles of motion, of becoming, of change. And we haven't got to his actual definition yet. I would say that 90% of philosophers don't even understand his definition, so they can't be agreeing with it. It takes a lot of work to understand his definition. But I think all philosophers, almost all philosophers recognize, this is what makes a philosopher, that whatever you say about something must A, be non-contradictory, and B, must be about that something and not about something else. So if we're talking about change, we cannot be talking about changelessness. If we're talking about, the dark, we can't change the subject to the light. They're just not the same thing. And so I think that most philosophers would want to avoid the Parmenidean account, and therefore they follow Aristotle's method, but they don't necessarily arrive at the same principles of motion, and therefore at the same definition of motion. And so,
Michael?
Yes, Nick.
Hi, hello, thank you
Hey.
much. I'm one of those that I'm not following the Parmenidean argument of no change. If you don't mind repeating or saying it another way, or maybe summarizing it, so maybe I can pick it up. I don't understand the argument.
Oh, okay.
no change.
So I'll try to do
So-
that somewhat faster, and then you can
Yeah.
tell me if it helps or not.
Yeah.
Parmenides is the great philosopher of being, right? And and he also is the one who first stated, that non-being is not, and that so to say of non-being that it is impossible, and to say of being that it is non-being is impossible. And so being is being, and non-being is not, simply is not. Now, but what about change? Change is something becoming what it is not now. And it is leaving a state that it will not be. And so change, on this basic analysis, has the consequence that we must say of things that they are also not what they will be, and they are, when they become, when they reach their end state, they are not what they were.
So let's use unmusical to musical. So when we become
Yeah.
musical, you're no longer musical.
Right.
Unmusical, sorry. So yeah. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. So if I'm unmusical, that means I'm not musical. And if I become musical, then I'm not unmusical. And so to be me is to not only have positive states of being, but to have negative states of non-being. And that is somehow to say that non-being is included in my being. And that means that we are compelled to say that non-being is. Okay, does that much make sense, or do
I kind of follow and yet not quite agree. I guess to the extent that being and non-being cannot be, is contradictory at the same time, is clear.
right?
But but when you add the temporal notion, when time, you were being now,
Mm-hmm.
we're unmusical now,
Mm-hmm.
but you will be musical tomorrow or in a
Mm-hmm.
year, then there is no contradiction in my mind, because one can be of two different states as long as it's at different times.
Well,
Or am I missing
good. That's good
something?
Aristotelian, right? But that's good Aristotelian. But what you're doing is you're saying, well, there's an underlying subject that remains the same through state A and state B.
You're
And
right. That's right. That's right.
that's right. And so yeah, that's part of the solution to this. But if there is nothing but being, and part of Parmenides' argument is one reason why there cannot be change or becoming is because to become is to become some being, but anything is already a being, and therefore it cannot. That which is already a being cannot become a being because it's already a being. And so if you think of it in this really kind of coarse, fundamental level, how can being become at all? Being as such, how can it become? Parmenides says it cannot. It makes absolutely no sense. And so, I mean,
Can I add something?
oh, please, yeah.
So for anything to become, right, it requires that it not be whatever it is going to become. But this requires saying that in some sense, not being is in order for things to be what they are.
Right.
And if Parmenides is right and not being cannot be, then change is impossible.
Right. Yeah, that was a very, very pithy, nice way to put it. Is that more illuminating to you, Nick?
No, not really, but I think I think I get the point. I mean,
Right. Well, you know,
kind of follow, and I think that you're right. The key thing is that it's a full substance, as a pure substance, then one could think it cannot be and not be. But if you think of it as a compound thing with some underlying thing remaining the same and something's changing, then that can be. But
Right.
if being itself is completely changing, then yeah, I can see
Excellent.
that.
And that's very, very good. Now, I can reply now to Garth, or I can say, not only are many philosophers, basically, maybe unconscious, tacit Aristotelians, but Nick is too, right? Because he used an Aristotelian analysis to overcome the Parmenidean problem, and so the solution lasts. It's got some legs.
I don't
Go
see
ahead.
it as a solution yet, though.
No, you're right.
Because so saying there's an underlying subject doesn't address the contradiction yet.
Why not?
The contradiction of not being being is still there. Saying that something can be in one way and also not be in another doesn't directly address. Seems like it a key to a solution, but it doesn't directly.
Wait, sorry. I don't know if I think Tyler just froze up or something. Oh, you're muted.
Yeah, he stopped making noise all of a sudden.
Okay. Do you want to repeat that last sentence, Tyler?
I thought you were about to respond, but okay. So if so that there can be underlying subjects which become something in some respect, right? In one sense, that is a way to approach change, but the problem is that we're still supposing that something's being one way is also its not being another way. And so we're still saying that non-being is
right
in this account.
Right.
No, we haven't specified how non-being can.
That's very good. I mean, I think you're leading directly to the to Aristotle's concept of lack here, as what we might call relative non-being. Right. Okay. Yeah, you're right. So we need to go further into this to actually get the solution. But anyway, I got a series of hands. So I see Garth first, and then Charlie.
Yeah, Nick's hand is still up on my screen too. I don't know what's up with that, but yeah, I was going to say this seems to me to point towards the theory of the forms in some sense, because the underlying subject or substance that does not change is the form of the thing, and the form is what is predicated of in order for it to change.
Yeah.
Or is that a complete misreading? I'm not sure.
No. But I mean, form is just one element. I think it's what one of the things that Aristotle's most interested in is that form doesn't absorb into itself all becoming, but it's just one principle, one essential thing to understand about becoming. If we are going to get becoming in our conceptual grasp and not turn it into something else. And why this Parmenidean thing is so interesting to me is, because Galileo is later going to define motion as a state. And then we can begin to ask, if motion's a state, has he returned to a form of Parmenideanism or not? I mean, we'd have to look at the text more, but there are certainly reasons to suspect that that with the quantification of cosmology, that that what we now call change isn't change at all. It's something else that is refracted through the quantification. But so eventually I want to be able to talk about Galileo more sufficiently. But we got to get more Aristotelian background and really understand why he says the things that he does. And only against that background can we assess whether Galileo's saying something that might be pretty nifty for quantification, but ontologically it's a complete disaster or mess or confused or whatever, right? Or maybe brilliant. And, everything's possible at this point because we don't know enough about Galileo in this seminar to be able to say anything. But it is striking to think of motion as a state rather than something that things undergo. And what the logical consequences of that are different than the mathematical consequences of that. And keeping those two levels separate, and then doing the logical ontological analysis of the Galilean notion of motion that will then go into Newton, et cetera. That's a very, very interesting project. But it's only interesting if we hold on to what Aristotle says and why he says it. Okay, sorry, that was a little detour. Charlie, then Clark, and then Isaac. And then maybe yeah.
I just have one comment or actually a question. It seems to me that Aristotle does not directly refute Parmenides. Instead, he offers a way of thinking about not being that makes it possible for you to talk about change.
Right.
That would be kind of my conception of it.
No, I think that's great. And it really turns on, what do we mean by refute? Once we've read Aristotle, we cannot be innocent Parmenideans anymore.
Yeah, right.
Right. And so, but yeah, no, I think you're totally right. And he will, right now he's not being very respectful to Parmenides, but he will be more respectful in other parts of this text. So yeah, we'll just have to see where he falls a little bit later on. Clark. Oh, sorry. Are you muted, or I'm not hearing anything?
It doesn't look like he's muted, but I don't get any sound.
Oh, no, not getting anything yet. Okay, we'll go to Isaac and then come back to Clark.
It seems to me that at least part of the Parmenidean problem is that Parmenides takes being to be a univocal term. Is that accurate?
Yes.
It seems then that if we took being to be an analogous term instead of a univocal term, we could then find a way out of the problem.
Yes, and that's indeed what Aristotle does. Thank you. No, you said that very precisely. I appreciate that, Isaac. Did you want to amplify that a little bit, or just make that remark?
No, I suppose I could amplify it. It seems to me that if Parmenides means by being simply beingly, or that which unconditionally is, then it makes complete sense to say that being cannot be anything other than it is.
Yes.
Anything other than what is, perhaps.
Right.
But on the other hand, if we take the word being to be analogous, then we can say that there is beingly, but also there are beings which participate in being, and so are called beings, but are not being itself, and so can undergo change without forcing us into a contradiction.
Exactly. So that was beautifully said. And for people who are in the group not so familiar with the term, analogously, being referred to analogously, can you say a word or two about that, just to set it up, because it's pertinent?
It seems to me, insofar as I understand it, that a word is analogous if it has a central meaning and contingent meanings. So I suppose we might say the word healthy, perhaps. I can say health, the central meaning of health is a state of bodily order. And we can say, I am healthy insofar as I instantiate that sort of order. And also this cereal is healthy insofar as it promotes that sort of order. I am healthy and the cereal is healthy, not in the same way, but in different ways, but that are linked to the central meaning.
Beautiful. Yeah. Okay, that's fantastic. And everybody just remember that, because Aristotle is going to bring that up in Gamma, the metaphysics, that we're going to return to after our detour through the physics, at least the first 3 chapters of the physics. Yeah, being is said in many ways, and therefore it's an analogical concept. And the purpose of his categories is to set forth the various ways in which being is said. But as Isaac also made clear, we would just be dealing with homonymies if we didn't have a central or a focal meaning that we could organize the different meanings of being towards, right? And that in Aristotle will be substance, and that's primary. That's the primary sense of being, and anything else that is, for instance, a quality or a quantity or a relation, only has being in its dependence on substance. Okay, so yeah, that's fabulous. That's exactly right. That's exactly Aristotle's approach here. So thank you for making that so clear, Isaac. I appreciate that. Clark, you're back.
Can you hear me?
I can. Thank you.
Great. I wanted to bring up the concept of form, like Garth was bringing up earlier.
Cool.
And so what I understand is, as you said, form doesn't absorb into itself all becoming.
Right.
So there are aspects of what becoming entails that do not connect to form. Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
So now what I'm curious about is connecting form and matter to being. So there are aspects of form that are not connected to what we mean by what we're trying to get at by being.
Right.
But we haven't brought up matter at all.
Right.
It seems to me if every, I don't know how to talk about it, but every thing or object or intention or state has two aspects, two poles. Is this a reductionism that is not helpful? Tell me if I'm wrong, but it's form or matter in some respect.
Yeah.
And so where does being resolve? Where does being reside?
Well, I think this is incredibly exciting that you asked that question, because it's the question that Aristotle puts at the end of book 1. Right? He says, but whether form or matter is substance, i.e. being, right? That is not a question that can be asked in the physics. But
yeah, okay.
But this is super exciting because your question is exactly the right one, and that's exactly the kind of question that leads us to metaphysics. Is that you've asked actually a metaphysical question, not a physical question, right? Because the relationship between substance and form, or substance and matter, is not answerable in a domain, a science that treats of moving things, of motion, of becoming.
Okay, I can get that. It goes to metaphysics at that point. In Aristotle.
Exactly. But I think that's very super exciting because that's the first demonstration we've had in this group of how the metaphysical question arises of necessity from the physical investigation. And so metaphysics isn't kind of unmotivated, airy-fairy, pie in the sky kind of wishful thinking, right? It answers precisely those questions that arise from the physics, from the question of becoming or motion itself, right? And we've already begun a little bit to understand this transition, because when we get to the principles of motion are always the same: form, matter, lack, right? They never change. And yet what changes. And so the principles don't change. What changes. And so the principles have this formal character that is, yeah. Well, anyway, I don't want to go too far into that, but we can already see like these two, I don't want to say two worlds, but these two levels beginning to separate out. Right? Anything that changes, you can only think it if you think it through a specific synthesis, the way in which the form, the matter, and the lack interplay in this instance of becoming. And you always you need recourse to those three things in order to comprehend something's becoming something. And so here we have a level of independence, something that doesn't change, and something that can only be thought. All right. And okay, great. Awesome. Let me see it. I think that Garth and Clark have not put their hands down yet, but okay. Awesome. Thank you very much for that, that excellent conversation. All right. Let me see here. What I think I can go to the next. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing this and go to the next image and share it. All right. So we started with some sentences to get it all becoming. And one of the things that Aristotle says is that we cannot understand becoming unless we look at what he calls composite sentences rather than simple sentences. Simple sentences lend themselves to a Parmenidean conception of change. And so when we say the human becomes musical, that word becomes, since it's simple, actually denies the reality of change. And so the word becomes a contradiction in itself, because the account of simple becoming denies there being an underlying subject that remains the same, right? And so it's only because of the underlying subject that remains the same that we can say something becomes something. If there's no underlying subject, then we have one thing popping out of existence and another thing popping into existence. So here with the simple sentence, human becomes musical, we see that this term becoming is not doing anything. As a matter of fact, it's a contradiction. The word itself is a contradiction because it implies that there's no underlying subject, which means there is no thing changing. There is only something, one contrary leaving existence and another contrary popping into existence. That is not becoming. So on the basis of, just on the basis of thinking what is understood in the term becoming, we cannot get at what is understood in the term becoming through these simple sentences. We need the composite ones. All right, so the next step, sorry, I really thought this was going to be short, but it's just not, and that's how the seminar is working. Right. Okay, what I really wanted to get at is he noticed that there are some sentences about change that don't fit into the human becomes musical, the unmusical becomes musical, into that pattern, right? And so now, because Aristotle wants to investigate all becoming, and therefore all cases of becoming, he needs to look and see if there's another linguistic form that captures them all, right? So now we look at something comes from something, right? The statue comes from bronze. Now what's nice about this is all those sentences that we could express with something becomes something, we can express the exact same content by rephrasing them as something comes from something. So the musical comes from the unmusical. And finally, a musical human comes from an unmusical human. So he addresses a little linguistic problem, right? Okay, so now it seems like we've got a universal linguistic form that the investigation of which is the investigation of all becoming. But then he notices some exceptions to this too. And then he needs to inquire into whether these exceptions can be expressed in this something comes from something linguistic form. So I wrote here, there's a problem here. We cannot say the musical comes from the human. Before we said the human becomes musical. And now we want to rephrase that in our new linguistic form, something comes from something. And then we run into the problem, oh crap, we can't say the musical comes from the human. That makes no sense. This seems to limit the universality of something comes from something. And Aristotle, again, goes to this composite. You know, if you expand your terms into a adjective and a subject, which can be thought of as a subject with a predicate, right? Then we can bring everything into this particular linguistic form. So we cannot say the musical comes from the human, but we can say a musical human comes from an unmusical human. All right. So now every sentence that we could express as something becomes something is now expressible in something comes from something, including the sentences that could not be stated in the form something becomes something. I'm going to just stop right there and make sure people are tracking this whole sentence thing. We want a linguistic form that accounts for all forms of becoming. Something becomes something was our first likely candidate. There proved to be exceptions. We found an alternative form, something comes from something. And we discover that everything that we could say in the first form, we could say in the second form, and the second form allows us to say, to assert becoming, even of those exceptions to the first linguistic form. Okay, is everybody cool with that? Raise your hand or say something if that just sounds like gobbledygook to you right now. Okay, so we're not running around looking at individual cases of becoming, because what we're trying to do right now is find out what would count as a case of becoming. All right, and what's the criteria for assigning becoming to some event? So that's why running around inductively perceiving isn't going to give us the criteria. And so we've gone into what one might call linguistic analysis. Okay. So, but that's false. I mean, I don't want to say that we're doing linguistic analysis, but it looks like that. And so I just want to acknowledge that. So there's one final thing, linguistic form that Aristotle stumbles on, right? Or not stumbles on, but acknowledges that so-called simple becoming. This is the one that most leads to Parmenidean conclusions, right? A statue comes to be, a plant comes to be, a human comes to be. Okay, and he's able to show then that all of these sentences are formulatable without any loss of content in sentences of the form something comes from something. So we see here the solution: a statue comes to be from something else, bronze. A human being comes to be from something else. What? The seed. All right. So the last thing we have to get to is this lack. So I wrote here, a statue comes from bronze. First, the statue comes to be from bronze. There's our linguistic form. The bronze, the underlying subject, does not come to be something else when the statue comes to be from it. The bronze stays bronze, even as the statue comes from it. Right? And third, but what comes to be something else in this becoming? Right? And Aristotle says it's the bronze's lack of statue form. So so now we have to kind of get at this lack thing, but I think I'll let the text speak for itself when we get to that. So it doesn't make any sense to say that the bronze, or the statue comes from the bronze, but the bronze never changes, because the statue is not naturally, or sorry, the bronze is not naturally a statue. So something has to change, and it's not the bronze. So what's changing? And Aristotle offers, right, that what changes are contraries. And something that's heated goes from cold to hot. the bronze goes from unformed to formed. And so he captures this non-being that caused the problems for Parmenides in this new concept, the concept of lack. And the lack is always the contrary of the end result. So if the end result is hot, it will have come from cold. If the end result is sculpted, it will have come from unsculpted. Okay, so we have this very interesting relative non-being concept, and we need to kind of see how Aristotle works with it to get a better handle of it. But that leads him to summarizing his solution, right? His principles of becoming. 1, there's the underlying subject. 2, the form. 3, the lack. And the important thing to remember here is that what I wrote here at the bottom, the subject is 1 in number, but 2 in being an account. Right, so in terms of something you can point to, it's just 1, the bronze. It's just that bronze, that one bronze. But here we see Isaac's point that since being is analogous, there's different ways of being, whatever is the underlying subject has 2 ways of being. 1 as being what remains through change, the other as being the opposite of what comes to be. So the unmusical human being becomes the musical human being. It's the human being that remains, and it's the unmusical that leaves, and it's the new quality of musicality that comes to be in its place. So matter, which Clark rightly said we haven't talked about, is a very, very interesting concept. Matter is even if it is 1 in number in a particular thing, it has multiple ways of being. Okay, and so we got to kind of hold on to this strange concept of some, and this is going to pervade Aristotle's thought. Things that, like, the one human being has multiple ways of the one human being that you count, like Michael McGettigan, just one guy, has multiple ways of being in relation, namely being a father, being a husband, being a student, being a teacher, right? Being unmusical, being a philosopher, right? I have many, many different ways of being, and yet I'm still countably one. And each one of those different ways of being are going to correspond to one of the categories. So I've got different ways of being in a qualitative state. I have different ways of being in quantitative states, right? Because my body is divisible, even if my mind isn't. My body is divisible, and I can be affected. I can affect things, right? These are all different ways of being, even though I am mere in terms of number, there's only one of me. But there are many modes of being that constitute my being the substance that I am, namely Michael McGettigan. Sandy.
I just want to ask a question about okay, I'm assuming that Aristotle is talking about, well, maybe he doesn't talk about this as much as we've been talking about it. I don't know, but it seems like in any case, it seems like one reason why we're spending a lot of time on this is because it's really important for Aristotle's thought. It's some kind of thing you really have to understand in order to move on. So I'm assuming that for him, this was also pretty fundamental. My question is what I'm not trying to disagree with him, but I'm just curious, like, what does it look like when I don't accept this? What would I be like a mentally handicapped person who couldn't distinguish between myself and other people, or like I'm just trying to understand what the person who you know, because then there's obviously the people who want to criticize it and say I disagree, but I think this is not about agreeing or disagreeing. This is about either it is or it isn't. So what does it look like when I'm mistaken, when I think that change does happen? What is that like? Give me an example of a person and what problem they would have if they didn't accept this or come to grasp it or whatever. The way, do you understand what I'm saying? I'm just trying to, because I know he's giving us positive examples, but I'm curious, what does a negative example look like? What kind of problems does a person run into when they're thinking, when they don't follow this, when they don't understand it?
Right.
I hope that's not too hard. I didn't want to ask something really difficult, but I think it would help me a bit.
I don't have a pithy answer to that. I'm just going to confess that. Aristotle develops this account of becoming as an answer to Parmenides. Period. All right. So if there is to be a science of things that become, then becoming must be possible. And yet there is a theory, a powerful theory, and as a matter of fact, the theory that most sophists of the day adhered to. So a very powerful theory that denied change, and therefore would need to say that all physics is just illusory because it's investigating something that is illusory, that's not real. It's like trying to have a science about something that you imagine. It's a science of your of imaginary things that come into being and don't come into and then disappear. So
I can perhaps add something.
so I'm going to stop there. Garth put his hand up, so he might have something more helpful to say. But I want to say, again, this is a purely, purely opening up a space for a knowledge, namely a science, knowledge of nature, when nature is understood to be that which is in motion. And so there's no knowledge of that which is in motion if being in motion is an illusion, because that would just be knowledge of appearances or knowledge of, that would be delusion. So, right, Garth, go ahead, and then Tyler.
Yeah, I think Sandy's question touches on a deeper question because, one reading of what Sandy asked is her asking about the account, right? And the Parmenidean account and the Aristotelian account are different, right? One is that change is an illusion, that the universe is like constant and unchanging. The other is that the substances remain the same and change takes place in their predications, if I understand it correctly so far. But another way we can look at this is we can ask, well, even if somebody gives a particular account, what are they actually thinking? Like, it seems like both philosophers are trying to get at what the actual thinking process that occurs, or the actual process in the world, if we can say that there's a difference between being and thinking in this case, which I have a hard time articulating that difference. And then, it seems like it's sort of like when Aristotle argues for the principle of non-contradiction, he just says, well, if you don't implicitly accept this piece of wisdom, then you can't think at all, basically. You can't speak or act, because all speaking and action implies a principle of contradiction, or it assumes it in order to take place. And it seems like maybe change is the same way. All of our thinking and action assumes this, even if we can't give accurate account of it.
Right. Sorry, I thought you were going to go further with that. I wasn't. Are you winding up
Well,
with that?
well, I was thinking about this before a meeting today. Like, should we treat philosophy as an introspective account of thinking, or actually as a determinative attempt to define and therefore exert ultimate mastery and control over your own thinking? Because it seems like, maybe because of my previous reading in psychology and cognitive science and stuff, it seems like the best we can do is sort of make an attempt to describe what's going on in our brain, but we don't really know what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm sure there are people who would take issue with that account and say, well, no, you really can decide how to think for yourself.
Interesting. Interesting. What you said, it brought a lot of thoughts up to me, but I wanted to check in with Tyler because he was starting to say something as well.
Yeah, I was going to respond to Sandy's
Cool.
question, and I think it's important to note that if not being is in some sense illusory, if change is illusory, right, then things cannot become better or worse. And so this means, in a sense, all ethics, anything in that sort of domain, would also be illusory.
Mm-hmm.
And so the stakes are actually very high once you look in that direction. If this sort of metaphysical thinking is the basis for how we think about life in a general way.
Mm-hmm.
So if we were to build off this notion that change is illusory, then you sort of, in a sense, are committed to the only sort of rational way of living would be, in some sense, a kind of stoicism or an attempt at indifference.
Yeah, Zooks.
And I also,
Stoics.
there's one thing that's sort of been bugging me about this, which is that to say that change is illusory does seem to be a contradiction on the part of the sort of Parmenidean account, which is you are effectively saying of something that it is not real to say it is illusory, but this presupposes that not being real is. So I think there's a underlying problem there as well. So and that's all I had to say.
No, you're right, and I think yeah, you're right. That is something that is that's been like the sand and the oyster of a lot of different philosophers trying to deal with that. You know, how can non-being be, and in what sense can non-being be, right? And Plato is going to have the famous development in the Sophists that that non-being is not, and Parmenides is right, but rather than non-being, there's otherness, and things become other than themselves. And so otherness and alterity become the Platonic solution to the question of non-being, right? And Aristotle is giving us a slightly different analysis, but I see Sandy wants to respond.
Yeah, so I mean, so basically if we don't follow Aristotle here, we wind up in some kind of determinism. Is that what would happen then? Where
What do you mean by
there's,
determinism?
well, I guess this idea that there's no possibility for, I don't really know how to say it, just that's what I thought when Tyler was talking, but now I'm blanking out.
Okay.
I'm just trying to, because I know you brought up some science guy earlier. I don't remember which one it was, but you know, I just so profoundly don't care about that. I'm just like, I'm not even ever going to engage or talk about this or whatever, like outside of historical.
Oh, Galileo, right?
Yeah, I really do not care. Like, you know, if to me, if the earth revolves around the sun or the sun revolves around the earth, human beings would still be killing each other and acting like idiots. So we haven't solved the problem, right? That's just kind of like how I look at it. That's my understanding of things. I mean, and you know, not to offend the science people, but you know, we all come here for some reason, right? Trying to understand.
I can tell you're still trying to figure out the reason for your being here.
Well, yeah, in a way I am. I'm trying to understand, you know, why he starts here, I guess.
Right.
And I guess, I mean, I can understand why he wants to start with physics and then move to metaphysics. That makes logical sense. Even though, again, I really don't care about physics or the physical world, and I don't really live here. But like I get it. It makes logical sense, but I'm just curious about you know, because I don't know, it just seems like when I read other philosophy, we would come into some fundamental understanding of something, and it would become really obvious what kind of errors would come out of it if you really didn't understand it. If you and I'm not even talking about the people whose example you gave who just came out right and denied what he said. I'm even talking about being in ignorance of it, how not being aware would already be a problem. You know what I mean? Let alone taking up its defense or the opposite position, you know? So that's why I was curious, because it's been, I guess, more obvious to me in the past with other philosophers than with this particular idea. And I, you know, again, I'll be the first to say, like, I can't really even say I've 100% understood it. Like, if you were to ask me to articulate it back to you, I would probably bomb that test. But I can, and to the extent that I think I've grasped it, just kind of accept it and sort of see where he goes from there. I know you hate that.
No, I think that's necessary with Aristotle for a while. I mean, I don't hate that at all. I mean, you know, I would hate it if anybody just sat here and believed, like got into some kind of disgusting epistemic state called belief and just like believed Aristotle or didn't believe Aristotle, right? We're trying to comprehend him. And I am taking this detour through the physics, which was an unplanned detour, because I think that some of the fundamental concepts that Aristotle works with become clearer here than they do in the metaphysics. And so we kind of need his discussions of principles and causes and matter and substance in the physics in order to understand better what's going on in the physics. So we've taken a detour that's not like, we're not yet engaging with Aristotle's ideological counterparts yet. We're just kind of digging into the mechanics of his thought. You know, why did, in this chapter in particular, I've gone into excessive depth with, because I think it's one of the only places in Aristotle's corpus where you see the concepts move, actually coming to be and going from some, how they become full-fledged philosophical concepts like matter and lack. Most Aristotelian concepts, in all of his texts, he just introduced them fully grown. You don't know where they came from. You don't know the context out of which they grew, right? Here we see some of those concepts emerging out of grappling with Parmenides and thinking about how can we think becoming in a way that doesn't deny becoming. Parmenides thought becoming in a way that denied becoming. And so really, I mean, it's really that focused an investigation right now. Now, how can we use the term becoming such that what we capture in that term, what we comprehend through that term, is actually becoming and is not ultimately, isn't this Parmenidean being that never becomes because it always just is. Now, in my reading, I read people's definitions of motion and change and stuff like that, or mathematical depictions of it, and for me, these are falling back into Parmenidean conceptions, or they just presuppose what needs to be proved, namely that something continues to be itself, even though its states change. How is that even possible? We say that all the time, right? But what must we think in order to make sense of that thought? And these principles that Aristotle gives us are the framework for making sense of that very simple thought. Well, it's actually a very, very complex thought, but it's so common and we take it so for granted that we never think about it. But and that's really what first philosophy is, getting at these most basic things that we use these terms, and society doesn't tell us not to use it that way, and if we get rich or whatever, we fail, and nobody says, well, you don't even actually understand becoming.
That was kind of my next question. So is becoming related to thinking then? Because otherwise I would just otherwise, like, a person would just say X is X, and then I would repeat it back in like a parroting kind of way without actually understanding.
Right.
So is that why this becoming thing is so important? It's related to our actual ability to think as well. It's not, I guess that's, I'm kind of starting to get it now that you pointed out.
You can't become knowledgeable if there is no becoming.
There's no learning or becoming musical.
Okay, it's just I get confused when he takes something like becoming musical, or when you introduce something like becoming knowledgeable, when he puts that right next to an example of a statue coming out of a stone, because that's a purely materialistic example.
Mm-hmm.
And or a seed turning into a tree is like a biological one. So they seem really different to me, all of those things. I mean, maybe music not so much, because it's related to those other forms of knowledge that he introduced to us, practice and all that. It's not, but it just, I was really thrown by him doing that personally since it was first introduced, because I was just like, I can't really see all of I'm not trying to be an annoying aesthete here, but I can't really see becoming musical as like a seed coming out of a tree. I see those as really, my understanding of those are really different things. I mean, I guess he's trying to, he just wants me to focus on the fact that there's a change. Okay.
Exactly.
Okay,
Exactly.
that's a little hard for me to do.
Yeah.
But it's like, like that is so basic. It's really kind of, it's hard for me.
Excellent. I mean, I think it's good that you acknowledge it. And I think it's very hard for very, very hard for everybody just to get into the frame of mind where you're just thinking about that. Yeah, I have to say, with Aristotle's examples, I often, I recall Kant fondly, who tries to eschew examples because they all, because we're supposed to think, things in terms of their fundamental principles, and examples always introduce way too much information, and we get distracted, and we're not concentrating on the principles anymore. So he was very careful when he to only introduce examples when absolutely necessary. And Aristotle's examples just always seem to obscure more than they illuminate. That's, and giving Kant right.
Okay, so it's not just me.
No, it's not just you. And I encourage people to get into those textual details and bring them up to the group, because even if I don't understand, maybe somebody has a really interesting connection to bring out in that example, right? So I really do encourage, when we do get to the text eventually, that people pick up on some of those textual details and either say something about them or ask questions about them. Because the only way we're going to get into Aristotle is not by skimming, as Ed said. If you skim, it just becomes drivel, right? You have to get into the details, and the gestalt, the way in which these details come together, that will come together by virtue of your concentration and focus and sustained attention to these things. Because the patterns will come together, but at the beginning, it's just wading through the swamp. So that's why I'm so impressed that so many people are still here, because it's very difficult work. Anyway, Richard's been incredibly patient, and then Clark.
Hi. Okay. So, like, Parmenides, like, later influences like Zeno, and there's kind of like the Zeno paradoxes, which I know of like a long time ago. Like, briefly in the reading, like, there's mention of Heraclitus, and also what's this name here? Lycophron.
Oh yeah, I haven't paid much attention to what he has to say about Lycophron yet.
Okay. Well, I guess with Heraclitus, like, is there anything in terms of how Aristotle engages with his thought that's maybe worth bringing into our discussion here?
No, that's exciting. I'm glad you brought that up. Let me see. I'm going to hit Clark, and then we're going to hit a little bit of the text, and just like we're going to go to the conclusion where the conclusion of paragraph 7, where he kind of summarizes his findings and talks a little bit about matter, and then we'll read a little bit of paragraph 8, where he then applies his solution to Parmenides and I think implicitly Heraclitus. But if not, I can certainly make his point against Heraclitus pretty simple, right? And that is that for Heraclitus, becoming means nothing remains. And Aristotle says you can't think becoming without there being something remaining, namely the underlying subject. And so, and there will always be form, and there will always be matter, and there will always be lack. And so these things never change. And so Heraclitus has failed to think becoming by merely thinking that everything changes and nothing remains. So I mean, that's a kind of a pat way of thinking about that. So for Aristotle, I guess what's new about Aristotle is that it's a particular relationship of change and persistence through change, and how to think those two levels as one process that he gives us in these principles. Anyway, yeah, so Clark, go ahead.
Yeah, I was glad to hear that it's okay it's okay to focus on the words, because in the readings, and this will segue right into the readings, I could barely get to our readings because you started with the second chapter of physics. The first chapter.
Oh yeah.
You started with second chapter of physics. I haven't read the first chapter. So I read the first chapter, and then I've spent almost all my time just with the first chapter, reading Reeves' commentary, trying to understand Reeves' commentary. There's just a lot. I mean, to me, there's so much here that in a way, I feel like I am a bit of a dilettante by the speed at which we're going through it, because I can't get inside of myself, internalize to the degree I would like with just basic concepts. Like in the first chapter, Aristotle says, you have to begin with the generalities first before you can get to the particulars.
Right.
And that's just a bridge too far for me, because right away I want to know how he creates, and I've talked about this before. Then if it's not with induction, and he's going to start with it, and then I started to read Reeves, and I'm just wondering, just one question: is Reeves authoritative enough that he's worth spending time on in terms of
Yes.
his commentary?
Yeah, I find him a bit dry and remote, and so I don't rely on him too much. But I think some of his notes are very, very helpful.
Okay. Yep. Thanks. That's it. I'm just.
Yeah. Hey, don't
confusing.
sweat it. Don't sweat it. That's don't sweat it, Clark, too much. That's why I'm spending a lot of time on some of these physics chapters, because just to get used to the way in which he speaks about something. Right? What's nice about this is he's talking about something that we're familiar with, namely change. Right. And so we can kind of relate everything he says, and about something being one in number, but many in being, whatever, all these strange things that Aristotle says, right? We can always relate it back to something familiar. In the metaphysics, there's like nothing familiar to relate all these terms to, right? So we're getting used to how these terms interrelate here at a level where there's some connection to something we're all familiar with. And then when we hit the metaphysics again, we're going to have a familiarity with these terms and how they interlock, such that when we hit the metaphysics, we can always refer back to the text in the physics to help get our bearings, right? Because otherwise there's just nothing what we today would call empirical that would help us get a handle on how he's using some of these terms. So we need something, we need an anchor. I'm using the physics as anchor. I think these early chapters are really, really helpful for that once you've gotten kind of used to them. Anyway, Garth, and then Ed. Oh, Ed, as a clap. Did you mean to clap or raise your hand? Okay, I'm going.
I was gonna say, what was I gonna say?
Sorry.
Oh yeah. It's been so long that I almost forgot what I was gonna say. I was gonna say some of these, like the topic of the possibility of change, I think, also touches on the possibility of skepticism, because I feel like skepticism is a dishonest philosophical position. In order to be skeptical about something, you have to pose like basically an if then kind of scenario. And where do you get the knowledge to pose that if question? If it's not this way, then it's that way, right? And I feel like all skepticism boils down to such unacknowledged assumptions. And I think in order to have a meaningful philosophy, you have to have the possibility of being wrong.
Right.
You have to say things that can possibly be wrong. You can't really call yourself a philosopher. All you do is disagree with everybody and say, well, this doesn't work and that doesn't work and this doesn't work and that doesn't work. Because what is your position that allows you to articulate that those things are false?
Mm-hmm.
Anyway.
I appreciate that. There is something criminal about skepticism. I agree.
There is the one exception, which is the kind of skepticism that just attempts to avoid even making negative claims about knowledge.
I mean, we get into the species of skepticism, and obviously it has its place because there are dogmatic fools who spout stuff off, and they need to be challenged, and they are usually challenged with skeptical tropes, and then their little structure kind of falls apart. So, as a tool, skepticism is great, but as a philosophical position, I think it's incredibly self-blinded and inadequate. Anyway, so thanks, Garth. Ed?
Yeah, this relates back to something that Clark said, and talking about, starting with the text. And there was a piece in the book 1, chapter 1 that was driving me up the wall. And he was reminding me of it. And because he brought up this movement from, that which is more noble and perspicuous to us to that which is more noble, in itself or by nature, however you want to put that. And it was only by reading it again, like the 6th time when he was talking, that it finally hit me in the head, because because he says in the second paragraph, he says, the natural route is to start from what you know as a person, what we know as people, I'm eating a pizza, whatever, to that which is more conspicuous and more knowable by nature. And then in the next paragraph, he says, well, we need to go in this other direction. I was like, wait a minute, you said the natural way to go is this way. And then it's like, well, duh, because what he's trying to say is that's the natural way. We're going to go the unnatural way. That's what I wasn't getting, because it seemed like he was contradicting himself. Because like, wait, I thought you said the natural way was to go this way. So aren't we going to go the natural way? No,
Right.
we're going to go the unnatural way. And then finally it's like, so it's not a contradiction. He's
fascinating.
It's the right way to do it is not the natural way. It's the unnatural direction is the direction to make sense out of everything.
Fascinating. So, okay, yeah, cool. I gotta take that up. But Peter.
Yeah, so following up on Ed's remark on, I guess it's down all the way up to the third paragraph of the first chapter. He says, that is why we must proceed from universals. For it is the whole that is more noble by perception, and the universal is a sort of whole, which is going back again to, like, you don't think of the I never thought of perception as being of the whole, of being of the outside part. I've always thought of it as like the detailed data that you build the whole out of. But he's sort of saying the opposite, which is, again, I'm also confused. I don't think we've adequately plumbed this first page of Aristotle, but we may never get there. Who knows?
No. I think that's awesome. And as a matter of fact, I wanted to go through chapter 7 in such excruciating detail in order to go back to that chapter and see how it maps on to what Aristotle is actually doing in chapter 7. We're going from an undifferentiated whole, X becomes Y, right? And then we're getting to that which is more knowable in nature, right? Form, matter, lack. That's not, those principles are not immediately evident in the undifferentiated panorama of becoming that goes around, around us. So I appreciate everybody coming back to that first paragraph, because that's one of my goals, is to get back to it.
Well, why didn't Aristotle write it in the right order in the first place? That's what I want to know.
Yeah.
All right.
Because a circle has no starting point.
Oh, beautiful, Garth. That's so beautiful. Yes, exactly.
I thought maybe it was his composition teacher was not all that great.
Well, if I draw a circle in space.
We're going to go Kant here. All right, so let's just, okay, so we have 20 minutes ish. Let's actually look at the text a little bit. I'm thinking, who's host and who can share the text? Because I can't share the text.
That would be me.
And do you have a digital copy of it?
I am going to attempt a screen sharing. I have never done this.
All right.
So
Okay.
we'll see how this goes.
You'll probably be better at it than me. Okay, so we're gonna look at what he has to say at the end. Some of it's not going to be completely comprehensible. Some of it should be yet now a little bit more familiar to us, at least, and see what his own words are, and then look a little bit. And then, since we brought it up, maybe we'll go back and look at that first chapter, and then see how Aristotle's approach in the 7th chapter is in fact an application of what he says in the very first chapter.
All right, where am I going?
Okay, page 15.
Page 15. What book is this?
Oh, you've got the metaphysics, not the physics up there.
Oh, what am I doing? Okay, yeah, hang on. Yeah, I for some reason thought that my PDF that was already open was the. So let me.
So, I mean, Sandy, one of the things I'm just really hoping that we're going to get comfortable with is he's looking for what he calls starting points, and we translate often as principles. And he's looking for the starting points of becoming. And and I think this chapter makes a pretty good case for what he means by a starting point or principle of something like becoming. You know, in English, unfortunately, we always call these things, right? Becoming's not really a thing, but that's how our language refers, and so we're stuck with that kind of language, right? So we're getting the principles of this thing, the becoming, and what are these principles? They're not parts of the thing. They're not, in that sense, they're not elements, but they are those, and I'm going to use the word concepts, which is very modern, but for lack of anything else, right? Those concepts that we must hold together in a particular way if we want to think becoming. And therefore, anything that becomes will be comprehensible as something that is changing by our employment of these concepts in this particular configuration. And so there we get a little bit about what a principle is. It's not a real component of the thing, right? Because there is no component that is common to all changing things, right? It's not an oxygen atom. It's not, there's no component that is present in everything changing that we could say, that's an element that we could build up all becoming out of. Right? So some inquiries are inquiries into elements. What are the fundamental parts that really make up a thing? But the principles or starting points are those concepts in a particular configuration that are necessary for getting the kind of thing we want to inquire into view in the first place. And thereby the guarantee that when we are talking about becoming, we're actually capturing becoming and not accidentally talking about something else. Okay, did you find the page? All right, so we're looking for page 15. Is this page 15? Oh, yeah, sorry. Past the introduction into the Aristotelian text, which is 191.
Yeah, look for a 1 and a 5 on printed on the page, Tyler, not a.
Right. You're going to have to go about 7 or 8 pages further, or actually more. Still in the introduction. Reeve has a chatty introduction to this book.
Yeah, you got to go way past. Yeah, there we go.
Okay, we're in Aristotle's text. So that's 1:2. We need to go to 1:7. Page 15.
There are a lot of numbers here to pay attention to. But
yeah, I know.
It's the bottom left, bottom right, those page numbers. So we're only a few pages away. Yeah, see 8. You see 8. You're just past 8.
Okay, gotcha.
Beautiful. Thanks, Richard.
It does mess with I think some of the numbers on my screen are blocked because of the way that, because of the way that Zoom is set
Just
up.
past page 10. So you got about 3 more pages.
It's 12, 14. Okay, we're on it. Okay, stop there. No, go up. Up,
Further up.
yeah. All right, so I need a reader because I don't want to hear my voice here for a little bit.
I
So
can
just-
read it.
Oh, beautiful, thanks.
Where do you want me to start?
So what I'd like to do is I'd like to just read a paragraph, and then I'm just going to check in with people and make sure that it's more or less comprehensible. And if there's any absolute obscurity, let's either put it aside or try to clear it up. So towards the top of that page is the paragraph that begins, "So it is clear from what has been said." Higher. Higher. Wait, we're on the wrong page again? No, okay, sorry.
Yeah,
Lower.
I don't know.
Lower.
I didn't see a "so it is clear."
Okay, yeah, okay.
It is evident then, perhaps? Is that the "so it is clear"? Is it maybe it
Jesus.
is evident then in one version?
Okay, so.
I'm using the one that was linked on the meetup page.
Yeah. Sorry, just go down a little. He says it is evident and clear frequently. So go down. Down. Down.
So it is clear from what has been said?
Down. Okay.
Oh, there, yeah.
Up
It is
right
then
there.
evident. No? Is that it?
Yeah, paragraph above it. I'm sorry. Can you go to the paragraph above it?
So it is clear from.
So it is clear from what has been said. So it is clear. There it is.
There it is. There it is.
Oh my God. Okay. Whew, that was an odyssey. Thank you, Tyler.
Is there a delay maybe? Okay.
Maybe it's just because of the big. All right, Garth, go ahead and start reading, and then yeah, we'll stop and just check in after every paragraph.
So it is clear from what has been said that whatever comes to be is always composite, and there is one thing that comes to be and another that comes to be this. And the latter is twofold, either the underlying subject or the opposite. By the opposite, I mean, for example, the unmusical, and by the subject, the human. And the lack of figure, the lack of shape, or the lack of order is the opposite, whereas the bronze, the stone, or the gold is the underlying subject.
Thank you. So just checking in. Is that pretty cogent? And if not, go ahead and say something and point it out, and let's clear it up as a group. Okay, I'm assuming silence is consent.
Well,
Okay, let me. I do have a question. I was
Awesome.
waiting for other people.
Go ahead.
Peter spoke moments before me. Let's let him say.
Well, I was just going to say, I think it's cogent, but it's written in Aristotelese, which can be difficult to understand
Right.
what point he's making. But the point he's making, I think, is simple. There's the thing that comes to be, the human, and it's what they come to be, the musical or the unmusical.
Right. No, exactly. And that's this funky ambiguity, or not this funky duality, two ways of being, one countable thing that is matter. Okay. That which comes to be the end product, that's the matter, and it's twofold: the underlying subject and the contrary or opposite.
So I find this analogous to when you take chemistry for the first time, you learn about physical reactions and chemical reactions. I'm getting the terminology right. And like water can change form from ice to liquid water to water vapor. Whereas that's a physical reaction, but you could also have a chemical reaction, for example, burning wood or baking soda combined with vinegar. And in that case, it seems like the underlying subject changes, or should we think of it in a different way?
I'm not quite sure, right? Because you're addressing this question of substantial change, and we haven't really looked into that very much yet, right? When one substance becomes either completely decomposes or not. So unless somebody has a remark about
So
that.
can I know,
Nick?
No, I don't. I wanted to get back into the paragraph to what Peter was talking about, or what
Okay.
Peter elaborated.
Are you cool with that? Are you cool with that, Garth? Because
which might
yeah,
have
we can
something
drop
to do
my
with
point
both.
for now.
Thanks.
Right. It might be related. I can't be confident about that, Garth. So there's the way I'm reading this. There's one thing that comes to be, and another that comes to be this.
Mm-hmm.
And he's talking about a composite. So your unmusical human, musical human, musical human is the composite we're talking about. Musical being one, and the other is unmusical.
Mm-hmm.
So, and the latter is twofold, either the underlying subject or the opposite.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the opposite, I mean the unmusical. So musical to unmusical are the opposites that are being talked about here. And by the subject, the human, which is man, okay, that's is so. So there is, so there's like the underlying subject, which is the human, and there is the other that comes to be this, which is the musical to unmusical, or the unmusical to musical, I forget now, one of them. So this is how he's breaking it down. So he's making a distinction between an underlying, one thing that comes to be versus another thing that comes to be this. Comes to be this is the thing that actually changes, I believe. Am I following that right?
I feel like you're a little bit off, but
okay.
I feel like you're a little bit off, right? Because we have to keep this composite, right? So the unmusical human being becomes the musical human being, right? So and here linguistically we have reference to that the underlying subject, right? The human being does not cease being a human being, but the unmusical ceases being unmusical. Right? And so the coming into being, so to speak, the coming into being and passing away is always between contraries. And that which has no contrary doesn't cease to be. It continues through this change, right? Human doesn't have the contrary, but unmusical has the contrary. And so yeah. So there's two things you got to hold on to: that which remains through the change, and that which disappears and is replaced by the end of the end point of change.
Right. So what you just said is what I was trying to say. Maybe I didn't say it rightly. Exactly. There is an underlying thing that remains unchanged, which is like, either it could be substance, could be something that is, and there's the contraries, opposites, which will change, and that is, and this is how he's solving the problem of addressing Mr. Parmenides.
Yes.
Way, that there is change.
That's
because of looking at these composite objects. There is there is a part that doesn't change, which is right, and which matter never changes or whatever. They're always there, and then there is an alteration of something, modification of something, which are the opposites. Okay, I think I follow what you said, so I have not interpreted right. Thank you.
Richard, you had your hand up. Do you want to jump in?
Yeah, I was kind of waffling whether or not to ask this question because it's kind of a little bit out of left field, I think, for most people, and pretty niche, but like, okay, like the ideas are pretty straight. Oh, okay. Like, I think it becomes more clear, like in these discussions. But I think just sort of like when I'm reading this on my own, kind of like, we're kind of going through snippets, and then I think we're translating through language and the language uses changes in the passage of a few centuries and whatnot. It often kind of just comes at me like a word salad.
Yeah.
But like, I guess as a crutch for now, like if I were to sort of like, this idea of being, like the underlying subject and, the nature of composite, like if I were to sort of like map it to kind of more modern concepts of like, intersectionality and like Bourdieu's idea of field theory, like, would that be completely inappropriate and blasphemous? Or like I'm not saying that I'm not like using it as a complete substitute for like what, like, of trying to understand what Aristotle is saying, but at least just sort of as a crutch to kind of like, anchor myself in sort
Well,
of.
the proof is in the proof is in the pudding, Richard. So, I mean, if you're ready, and you don't have to be ready, right? But if you're ready to, show how maybe the concept of intersectionality illustrates what the relationship between substance and property, or that which changes and that which doesn't change in Aristotle. If there's a way to illustrate what Aristotle is doing with these concepts, there's absolutely nothing heretical about doing that. So, I mean, so if you want to just briefly share the thought of how you see between it, but if you're not ready for that, that's totally cool too. You can do it another time.
I think I'm not like fully confident enough in Aristotle's vocabulary yet
Okay.
to kind of have that discussion, but okay.
I think that you're getting onto something very important, and I'm not going to spend any time on it except for the fact that identity is obviously a huge issue politically and metaphysically in the 20th century. And the question of identity is the question of what remains the same through change. And so in a sense that we're talking about exactly the same thing, it's just that Aristotle is doing it outside of a particular political context with a set of political interests, and just looking at the logic of the relationship between identity and change. So I think there's a lot of potential overlap.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. All right, Charlie.
I hope I don't confuse. If I do confuse things, then just say, everybody wipe that out. If you go just a little bit further down to line, in my translation, I'm using a different one, down to line 30.
Yeah.
Aristotle says, actually, there are three things here.
Right.
Keep in mind.
Mm-hmm.
Number one is, I'll use the example. Number one is a musical.
Mm-hmm.
The other is the unmusical. And the third is the underlying subject that undergoes from unmusical to musical.
Mm-hmm.
So you have three things. You have that which is becoming,
Mm-hmm.
that which is disappearing, and then
Mm-hmm.
the subject under the underlying subject that supports both those, or that is affected by both those.
Mm-hmm.
And I think if you kind of think about those three elements reading through this, that's sort of the key to it.
Yeah.
If you just think of those three things,
right.
Just think that whatever has become, whatever quantity or quality that has been added, that has its opposite, which has been left behind and which is no longer there. So there are two things. And then you have this subject, which this has happened to.
Mm-hmm.
And those are the three things you just keep in mind.
Right. Right. So there's one little modernism that crept into that, and that is the idea that the underlying subject doesn't undergo any change. But in fact, it is the bronze that is, that is being turned into a statue.
Right.
And so, but it's not the bronze losing its bronzeness. It doesn't get another molecular structure or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
So the underlying subject, which he will call matter, right, has this, it is not an indifferent vehicle that never changes through all these changes. It's just that the way it's involved in change is different than the qualities or quantities, the contraries, the way they're involved in change, right? The contraries come to be and disappear and pass away. And through that, the underlying subject changes without ceasing to be what it is. Bronze does not stop being bronze when it becomes a statue. And yet it's gained something, it's changed because it's gained the form. And once it's gained the form, we can look back and say, well, it lacked that form. And if it didn't lack that form, it couldn't have gained it, right?
Right.
So the underlying subject is a complicated concept. And that underlying subject is what he's going to call matter. And so it's important for us to keep in view the complexity of this concept. And just because when we talk about the four causes later, right, matter is going to be one of them. And so we need to keep that complexity of the concept present in our minds. So, right. But do you see how I'm slightly differing from the way you presented it? Or
Yes, yeah, I do. No, I appreciate that too. Yeah. It's an aspect of it that I did not take into account in my little explanation.
Okay, great. Well, then thanks for bringing
Eric,
it up.
is it always matter, the underlying subject, or like in the case of human, is he referring to matter as well, or?
Yes. Yeah. But matter's not a thing. Matter's not an element that makes up the composition of a thing. Like maybe cells make up an organism, or Lego blocks make up a Lego structure. Matter's not like that. Right. And we can see that insofar as, he says, that, for instance, the letters A and B are the matter for the syllable ba. Right. So matter is form specific. We can only understand what the matter of something is once we've understood its form. And so we understand matter through form. So, and we understand, that in change, something loses a form, what it was, unmusical, and gains a form, musical. But at the same time, the form of the human being doesn't stop being the form of human being through this change. So I don't want to get it too complex, but the term book picks out something specific in the world. Matter doesn't do that. Matter is what I like the term a functional concept. It is a concept that tells you that in understanding any change, right, there must be something that remains, because otherwise I'm not dealing with change. But what that something is depends on the kind of change that's happening, right? And so there is not one thing, right, like in contemporary scientism, right, when they'll say materialism or something like that, that there's this one thing that is in the world, and the world is composed of it, and it's through all its various permutations that we have stars and atoms and clouds and all the rest of it, and it's all just matter, right? That's matter picking out matter is a substantial concept, not a functional concept. And matter is a substantial concept, says that there's an ontological thing out there that is matter. Matter as a functional concept is if you try to understand what is relevant to a particular change or a particular set becoming, right, you will have to find out what remains the same from the starting point to the end point. And whatever it is that stays the same, that's the matter. But there's nothing common between all the matters. There's nothing common between the letter A and the letter B on the one hand, and the human being on the other hand. They're not composed out of the same things. You can't break them down into the same thing. Letters don't have atomic structures. Bam. Okay, Clark.
Yeah, this is a rabbit hole that I've been actually going down specifically, and that is the relationship of matter to form. Just reading a bunch of different people and reading Aristotle on it. But man, you cannot understand matter, literally, because form, from what I understand, tell me if I'm wrong, form is we can only understand the form. We can only see the form. Matter, if you reduce anything that you're looking at, say a house, it's made of bricks. The house is made of bricks, the form of the structure of the house, then there's the bricks.
Mm-hmm.
Well, what are bricks made of? Well, that's a form and a matter also.
Exactly.
Well, and what is the cement that makes the bricks, or the clay that makes the bricks out of? That's a form and a matter. Keep going down, and finally you get to primary matter, which cannot be known at all. And this is I'm trying to get some foundation, some scaffolding to understand Aristotle. And I'm finding, I'm completely ill-equipped to understand it or make any claims on this. But I can say right now, I'm really stymied by that, because is it correct to say that form is the only thing we can see and understand? You can't really understand anything about matter, because you keep reducing it down and finally it disappears into prime matter, which is unknowable. So everything is composed, really, the matter that I see is composed of the unknowable and its form.
Right.
And I'm stymied by that, because that's a kind of metaphysical conception that actually throws huge problems in my mind about making sense of the whole ontology of what we're talking about.
Cool. Right. I would have thought that would have been very up your alley to say that there's something intrinsically incomprehensible about being.
Well,
okay, but I think Garth wanted to respond to what you said.
We can talk
and then you can respond.
Yeah, actually, I'm responding specifically to Clark here because I've been reading some of Schelling, and in his what's it called, essay or whatever on human freedom, he sort of discusses this, although in slightly different terminology. And I think it's a problem that German idealism dealt with, because if we think about what you just said, Clark, what you're saying is that the underlying subject of anything we know is the unknowable. And to Schelling, this is not an acceptable answer, to say that what underlies all of our knowledge is something unknowable. And so there seems to be a problem with that formulation. And what exactly is that problem? And does it have to do with God or some notion of nous, of divine order? To me, I feel like my answer to this is just to say that, yeah, that's the way it is. I see order as a moment of chaos, basically. And that's the way I see that dichotomy, right? If you take order to its limit, you find that ultimately order is just something that happens within the larger sphere of chaos. But I could see why people wouldn't accept that answer.
Yeah, well, my issue, many issues here, but one is my point in studying Aristotle is to understand. This is not bringing understanding if by studying his understanding of things, boiling it down, if it's legitimate to do so, that I come out with, you can't have knowledge of matter at all. You're right, Michael, I'm comfortable with that, but for a different reason. I just don't think we understand. Well, I don't even want to get into that. That's an ontology of science that we're not talking about. But
no, it's exciting to eventually broach those questions, right? But right now, right here, we're seeing, how matter is introduced and why it's introduced, and it's introduced with respect to becoming. Now, maybe with respect to becoming, there is always an essential darkness that is not ever present in form. There's never darkness. There's never obscurity. There's never non-knowledge with respect to form. But in order to account for becoming, we can't rely on form alone. And so now, and Aristotle is giving us this concept, right, that he's calling matter, and we have to disambiguate this concept of matter from our contemporary concept of matter, which is at home in ideologies of materialism, right? Whatever he's calling matter isn't that. And the idea is that, well, I don't want to talk about the idea. I think being provoked by this is really good. And I wouldn't get too excited about prime matter, which is, as Kant would call it, a limit concept. You know, it's not really, it's a tricky one. And that's all I'm going to say, because otherwise I'll go down too deep a rabbit hole. Okay, let me see. Are we at time? I can't see the. We're well past time. All right. Then let's. Oh, sorry, Ed, go ahead.
Yes, I just wanted to make the silly remark that when you really delve into the matter, you're really getting into the woods with Aristotle.
That's actually a remark I kind of wanted to make, because he does use the term matter in the paragraph before we started talking about it, but in a way in which it's translated matter, but the Greek is, as you know, hule, right? But here it's more like the kind of hule that is usable wood, like wood that you can use, like for building beds and stuff like that. So we go from this wood that you can use precisely to the philosophical terminology of matter as that which underlies changes of form and is nothing other than that. Now, the deeper reason here is that if matter were knowable as itself, it would have a form, because we would be knowing matter's form. And if it had a form, it would, like all formed things, have a limit. It would be limited. It would be distinct from anything else. Right? But that would mean that there are things that matter couldn't be because it's limited. But everything that is, insofar as it's susceptible of change, has matter. So matter can't be limited by any limit, and therefore matter cannot have a form. So this is kind of like negative theology. And as a matter of fact, this is kind of the basis for a lot of negative theology, is the way in which one must speak of matter if one is to speak of matter as that which can take on any form. If it can take on any form, it can't be limited by any form, and therefore it cannot be limited. So it is the unlimited. It is aperon, that which is without limit. Yeah, and I'm just going to say, Christians, like to call Aristotle, even though he talks about something divine, an atheist, right? Precisely because of this, the unlimited matter in Aristotle, right? If it's unlimited, it can't have form, which means it can't be created, which means it precedes God, blah, 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 right? So matter is going to create a lot of problems in the Aristotelian way, in the Aristotelian conception for early Christian theology. And that's why, it's funny when I talk about something divine, people think I'm going into religion, but we're talking about Aristotle and eternal matter that's unlimited and it can't be religious and all the rest of it. So a lot of our contemporary concepts just collide and crumble when they hit Aristotle. And so we need to think our contemporary concepts against the background of where they originally came from, namely Aristotle and Aristotle's appropriation of Plato. Because really there wasn't a historical appropriation of Plato until in the West until the 14th, 15th centuries. Except one dialogue, the Timaeus. Anyway, sorry for the historical erudition. Okay, so can we just continue reading from where we started, and then we'll read out loud the paragraph thereafter and
Oh,
see how
wait,
he,
Michael,
yes.
are you continuing the session then, even though it's been 2 hours?
Oh, no, I meant next time.
Oh, okay, okay. I'm sorry. I totally zoned out there. Sorry.
No, that's totally cool. It happens to the best of us. You get it talking about limited and matter and pure potentiality, and people zone out. It happens. Anyway, it's all good. Let's just start there. Start reading. I promise not to do an introduction because I've done enough introducing today, and we'll get through some text. We're going to talk about how he applies his principles, which are not yet a definition, principles of motion to the critique of Parmenides in paragraph 8. And then I'm going to pick out just a couple tiny paragraphs in chapters 3 and 4 that you read for today and try to hook them up with this general critique of Parmenides. That will free us up to go to actually we're going to skip chapter 2 for a little while. We're going to chapter 3 and then see how he gets to his definition of motion. And he's going to introduce the most important concepts in Aristotle, right? Dunamis, energia, potency, and activity. And it's in these concepts that he's going to ultimately define motion. Now, once you all see how that more or less works together, when we return to the metaphysics and he starts talking about these things rather in an unmediated way without much preparation, then it's not going to be quite such a shock. Okay, so that's another kind of pedagogical tool I'm using to hit the potency actuality in the physics so that we can wrangle better with them in the metaphysics. And then we're going to go to chapter 2 and hit the 4 causes again, briefly. Well, briefly is relative, of course. And then we'll head back into the metaphysics and go to the principle of non-contradiction. But we're already seeing how important the principle of non-contradiction is in the critique of Parmenides. So I wanted to see how that works concretely before we start looking at his defense of and the way he thinks the principle of contradiction as the principle of non-contradiction as, so to speak, the fundamental, the substrate of being, and not just a technical tool for valid judgments. All right, so that's a plan for the next several weeks. So I'm done talking. Anybody want to say anything before we abjure today, or whatever the word is?
Well, will there be a specific reading assignment that you'll write out and send to us, or?
Well, yeah, I always do. I always update the webpage about 2 or 3 days after. So by the end of this weekend, the first line is always the new assignment.
Yes, good. Okay.
I don't think I think the only thing new, if you've actually read all the stuff I've assigned, then you've read everything relevant except for the last chapter, in which he again mentions the divine in a very interesting way. That would be chapter 9 of book 1. I want to talk about that a little bit. And I don't want to get too lost in the Parmenides because the beginning of the Parmenides, he doesn't talk very much about the problem of thinking becoming in a Parmenidean way, but he's mostly concerned with Parmenides talking about being as one, and then Aristotle's showing that no matter how you twist and turn this concept of unity, you end up getting multiplicity, a plurality, and so the theory falls short because he didn't think it right, I guess is the way to put it. Okay, is that okay? Okay, thanks for your patience on this. I swear to God that this first chapter, or actually these first 3 books of physics are, even though they're hard, it's all Aristotle, they're really going to start gelling in your mind, and then then the passages in the metaphysics are going to become almost familiar to you. And so we can really grapple with substantive issues rather than worrying about, what does it mean by this? What does it mean by that? Which is the necessary beginning of any of these, any work on Aristotle. All right. Should we leave it at that? thank you
Yep.
so much for your.
Thank you, Michael.
I love you. I love your guys' remarks and your concerns and the things that you point out. It really increases the learning potential of this seminar. So thank you very much for your participation. We'll see you all next time.
Yep. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Ciao.
Thank you.
Ciao.
Thanks, bye.
Anybody
Thank
staying
you.
online? I guess not.